Well, thank you for joining us. We are in the midst of the series, Thriving in Community. This is video 4 of this part of this series, which we've broken up actually into 4 parts. And each part is focusing on an essential ingredient for growing a healthy and thriving community. This is as presented by Dr. Jim Wilder and Michael Hendricks in their book, The Other Half of Church. And so right now we are on the 3rd ingredient of thriving in community, which is group identity. And so
what are the first 2?
Well, the first 2 are joy and attachment love. And if Hesed, and if you have not watched those videos and sermons connected to those, we just really encourage you to go back and watch those because they are so foundational for maturity and character growth, as well as really an important foundation for group identity. And that sort of takes us back to, not to the sermon, which was on Sunday, but the video that came out a week before this one, which we kind of quickly just do an overview of kind of joy and love, Hesed, just because, yes, they are 2 ingredients, but they are also a big part of group
Yeah,
identity.
and I think that's the thing we have to recognize, that as we're going through all of the 4 ingredients, they build on each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it is sequential. It isn't take one here, one here, one here. All 4 ingredients have to be present for transformation to happen.
That's right.
And
They interact with each other.
And they interact with each other, and they have to sort of happen in the particular order as well. So that's important to keep in mind. And we do cover those in the previous videos.
That's right. So today we are going to focus on this aspect of group identity. And so when it comes to the group identity, and it's particularly the chapter that Michael Hendricks and Jim Wilder talk about this, they use Colossians 3:12 to kind of start this conversation. So we're going to kind of use that here as well. And later on in the series, we're going to touch on, what is called the fruit of the Spirit that's found in Galatians 5:22 and 23, as well as where there is absolutely overlap on some of these, these character traits, these identity traits, as well as we're going to touch on aspects found in the Sermon on the Mount through Matthew 5-7.
So what is it we're talking about today?
We're gonna get there right away. We're gonna start with Colossians 3:12, and then we'll get in there.
Okay.
So here's Colossians 3:12. So, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. And so today, as we're actually going to we are going through this list. Sunday, you talked about compassion. And today, we're going to talk about kindness.
Good.
But before we get into that, when you preached on it, you actually said that these 2 are actually related. Compassion, the first one on this list, followed by kindness, they're kind of related. So I want to just kind of share a little bit about that in how they're related to each other.
Yeah. So on Sunday, I talked about, well, for me, I always have a hard time distinguishing what sympathy is, what empathy is, what compassion is, and then
they can be used
niceness
quite interchangeably
and kindness,
quite often.
Very much so. So what I found was in kind of looking this up in the dictionary and trying to get some biblical references here is compassion is actually making a personal connection with someone and wanting to help to improve their situation when they're in distress or misfortune. Where empathy is you're making a connection with somebody, being able to relate to how they feel because you felt that way before.
Right.
And you can make yourself feel that way to sort of be there for them. Sympathy is just really seeing someone in whatever situation they're in and saying, oh, that's too bad for them.
Right.
And really compassion is the motivation for kindness. So if we think about kindness and compassion being 2 sides of the same coin,
right.
I'm not sure you can actually have compassion without it becoming kindness.
Right. So kindness is the fruit of compassion.
Exactly.
And so that's actually really cool. And so when you're saying that, the idea that you can't really have compassion without kindness, it's very much the action-oriented part of compassion in a lot of ways.
Compassion is the motivation to be kind.
And kindness is the actual acting
part,
out of it. Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool because Jack Hayford describes kindness as goodness in action. So it's
a good way to say it. Yeah.
Doing something that is good for another person. So it is active. And so we are kind of using this phrase that we're going to
Yeah.
use throughout this part of the series. We are people who do acts of kindness intentionally.
Yeah, and I threw that in there because
That's really good.
I'm not against random acts of kindness, but I think sometimes if we're not making a connection with people, it's not motivated by compassion.
Right.
So is it really kindness then, or is it just being nice? If I'm doing it just, if I'm not motivated to help the person, if I'm doing it to make myself look better, there's lots of reasons we can be kind. We can be coerced into being kind. There's lots of expectations of people for, we expect our kids to be kind.
Right.
And we're trying to teach them that, but I think it can go too far. And so I just wanted to put that in there, is that I think it's important for us to be aware of who we're being kind to and why.
Well, that's a good point. Well, I think just as you brought up nice, I think that's probably a good place to kind of really go into as far as kindness. Is kindness and nice or niceness are not the same thing. Being nice, according to Forbes, tends to mean being polite, pleasant, and agreeable in a given social situation.
Yep.
Whereas being kind is an action that is seeking a positive impact.
So those are two very distinctly different things.
Very much so. So it's kindness is not merely the giving of pleasantries. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's encouraging words to others. That they definitely come from a place of compassion, empathy, and the desire to build up.
I get that. Yep.
And I think that's the really thing. It's not just sort of like, oh, this is just the social decorum to say something nice. It's like, no. I want to say something because I want this person to feel good about this thing that's happened, this thing they've done. And so I'm doing this because I want them to be built up. And that is that motivation and that compassion of that. So it's going beyond niceness or pleasantries when we encourage one another. And I think it's sort of the idea of by doing that is kind of when we can be more specific. I think kind of it's nice when someone has done something and you say like, that was such a good job, which is good. I mean, I would encourage people to do that. But I think it becomes kind when we start to add maybe something specific that you liked in what they did. Because it really does communicate to the person that you were paying attention or that or whatever it is that you saw, and that you've thought about it and just like, hey, this is a good job. I really enjoyed this specific, this particular part or this thing.
It values their actual contribution.
Exactly.
As opposed to, you did a good job is very generic.
Yeah, it's a pleasantry.
It's not bad.
It's nice.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, it's not. We're not saying don't
What's
do
going
that.
through my head? If you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's from Bambi.
Is that where it's from?
Remember a flashback?
Yeah, that's right. All right,
to my kid's childhood. There,
That's right. All right. Another way this kind of kindness is different than niceness. Is kindness is loving others enough to put their needs before your own. So you're doing something that serves the benefit of the other person.
Yeah. And I think that's you're actively seeking to help that person improve their situation and acting, putting their benefit ahead of your own.
Yeah.
I think that's Jesus modeled that.
Yeah, absolutely. He demonstrates this kind of all over the place. Like, and there's so many stories that we can go where Jesus demonstrated kindness. You can go like just the calling of the disciples.
Yeah.
Like that is not people that would have been typically called to follow a rabbi. Mm-hmm. So just that is
in itself is kindness.
Healing the sick.
Because they would not have been expecting that.
Exactly.
Actually, it was really funny when I was preparing the message for last Sunday.
Yeah.
I was trying to give examples of compassion, but in each example of compassion, Jesus also showed kindness.
Absolutely.
Because they're tied that closely together.
Tied together.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I guess when you see that's probably why when Paul was writing to the Colossians, it was compassion and kindness were kind of came together.
Yeah.
Because
in that list of how the church should operate. Yeah.
Right. So he's calling the disciples with that kindness, because people probably said like, wow, you called Matthew, how kind of you.
Yeah.
You would have thought, or Peter, any one of those people. Healing the sick, obviously, that's very kind. Feeding the multitude. Mm-hmm. Well, we can really go on and on. But it's Christopher J. Wright. He kind of points out the kindness demonstrated by Jesus was, and I like this a lot, that he was interruptible.
Yeah, that's something we see over and over again, is that some of the miracles that Jesus performed were for people who, from an outside perspective, looked like Jesus wasn't expecting them to be in his path that day.
So much of the Gospels are like that. Christopher J. Wright, he would write this: many of the things that Jesus said and did in the Gospel stories happened because somebody interrupted him when he was actually doing something else, or on a journey, or visiting, or eating.
Mm-hmm.
And just quick, kind of thoughts. There's the woman who was bleeding in Mark 5, 25, 34. She interrupted Jesus as he was going to a different medical emergency.
Yeah.
Blind Bartimaeus.
Exactly. And again, he was sitting on the side of the road,
Yep.
heard Jesus was coming down the road and started yelling and screaming, "Hey, Jesus, what did it?"
Yeah, as he's like leaving Jericho or something
and
like that.
everybody's trying to like shush. And,
Yeah.
and it's a big crowd. I mean, Jesus may not have even
Absolutely.
noticed he was there if he hadn't created such a ruckus.
And so we could focus on any one of those like healings and teachings and all that sort of that as acts of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the idea of this focus on Jesus showing kindness by being interruptible, and that we can sort of, again, using that phrase, we are a people that can be interruptible.
Yeah.
And I just I think just even as a father trying to make sure I do this so that, because a lot of the times, we both can work from our house. And then if my kids are home, they kind of sometimes want to talk to me. And that's I definitely haven't always done it well, but sometimes it's sort of like I'm in the middle of something.
And don't bother, Daddy, I'm working.
Yeah, that's right. And we don't want to do
Said that
that.
too
And
many
that
times,
doesn't mean that I necessarily, every time they come downstairs into my office, stop what I'm doing and do this. Sometimes it's just allowing them to interrupt me and be able to say, okay, I got to finish this. But when I'm done that, I can give you do that. And it's just stuff like that. So going back to the interruptible, especially focusing on this idea with Jesus, is while I was reading about different kinds, sort of acts of kindness, they always in the books I was reading in commentaries were always like really big.
Yeah.
And I think quite often, even when you hear people preach on being kind, they tend to share stories. I'm gonna say that preach well, which are usually really, really big,
dramatic, and over the top, and
exactly
very big impact.
That's right. And although they can be really great stories because they are really big and dramatic, and there's a wow factor to it.
It seems unattainable for the rest of us.
It's overwhelming. And I think it's sometimes very unintentional.
Yeah.
And they can miss out on the acts of kindness that could happen, just the everyday things of life.
Things,
And I think that's why I like this focus on Jesus as being interruptible.
Yeah.
Because it can seem overwhelming, okay, now you're going to go heal that person just because they interrupted you. Like, oh, really? What? Hold on.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. Hopefully that can happen. But what are these million little acts of kindness that we can do instead of trying to only focus on the big notable acts of kindness?
Where we're going to get noticed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there's little things like we've talked about this many times. You can just shovel your neighbor's walk.
Yeah. And just even expressing thankfulness or gratitude to your servers. What I like to do is I like to learn my server's name.
Yep.
I mean, they always say it usually when they introduce themselves at the beginning. Sometimes I'll forget and I'll ask them, but I like to thank them personally at the end of the thank you, whatever and whatever their name is for serving us today. We appreciate, and try and be specific, like we talked about. And I think that's many times people that have served us, their faces light up when they hear their own name, and that you took the time to learn it and thank them at the end.
Absolutely. So we can be a people who express kindness in the everyday things of life. And we kind of started to allude to this, but a really important thing about kindness is it's not about you.
Yeah.
No, we talked about kindness is loving others enough to put their needs above ours. Now we can take that to the extreme. It doesn't mean you don't worry about your needs at all.
We don't have boundaries.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
But kindness is doing something, or the willingness to take action that will be for the good of someone else that might just be inconvenient to ourselves.
Yeah, we're not intended to deplete our entire resources taking care of other people to the detriment of ourselves. But on the other hand, we are not to be selfish either and take care of our own needs and then just give out what's left over. I think there's I don't hesitate to use the word balance here, but I think there has to be a definite focus on the priorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so kindness can sometimes just be inconvenient. And let's not get too caught up in that word. Sometimes it's inconvenient because it takes time to do that, to stop and do what you're doing.
Or I might be on a path to doing something else.
Exactly. It's the simple as that thing is taking a time to help out a friend in the midst of a busy schedule. That can be an inconvenience. It'd be like, oh, yeah, I really got all these things to do.
Yeah.
Well, this person really needs my help. I can give them a couple hours and then come back to this.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we mean by it can be inconvenient. We don't have to always go to the biggest, most inconvenient thing.
Yeah.
So do that. Then that's
I'm going to quit my job in order to feed the homeless.
Exactly.
Kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Christopher J. Wright explains that kindness goes beyond duty. It means doing something you don't have to do but choose to do. And it also goes beyond reward.
Oh, I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because sometimes it's easy for us to get caught up doing something that we know is going to benefit us somehow.
That's right. It's really about benefiting the other person when we talk about kindness. Now, that doesn't mean if we receive some kind of reward that it's no longer kindness.
Yeah.
It just means that's not the motivation.
Right. And that comes back to the compassion side.
Exactly.
Compassion is is our motivation to do the kindness based on our wanting to help the other person.
Exactly. And I think there's lots of times, and I know I've done this, where I've kind and somebody sort of have, like they do give me some sort of reward, if you will, whatever you want to say. Maybe it's, like you help them move and they buy you some pizza.
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff. Because that could be that person acting receiving that kindness and expressing their gratefulness with gratitude.
Yeah, exactly.
And that sort of stuff. So
right. And I think, too often we have that sort of idea that it's better as a Christian. If we're martyred, we don't get anything in return for what we do. And I don't think it's supposed to be exclusively that.
No, I think, as we said, it's about motivation.
Yeah.
If we're doing it for the motivation for the reward, then it's wrong. If we're doing it with the motivation of compassion, and that person chooses to express their gratitude, that's wonderful, and let them express that gratitude and thankfulness.
I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. And kindness is best demonstrated in our community and our families. This is how we learn how we are to be kind. I think I could probably tell many stories of my parents and their kindness, but one story that is quite simple. I can remember going to so many years ago, going to work, locking my keys in the car, and calling my dad. Said, "I locked my keys in the car. Is there any way you can bring the spare key?" And he went out of his way on the way to work to come to my work to give me the spare key and then go on to work. And I remember even one of the guys working there asked me who that was. I said that was my dad. He was just so amazed that my dad would go out of the way to do that. It wasn't like he went 3 hours out of his way to work. He had to leave maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes earlier than normal. But just like it's that sort of thing. And I think that's such a place in our families or community is a great way to demonstrate what it means to be kind, as we've talked about, that settles into the right side of the brain, that faster than our cognitive thought, that where our identity lies, and we start to see that, and our brain registers that as this is who we are, this is what my people do, and we see that constantly in our lives, and we start to do that.
That's kind of the whole point of group identity.
Exactly.
Is that we use Jesus as our model. He's at the center, but we understand who Jesus is and how he taught and what he taught and how he acted it out as our example, and we try and live that way and practice.
That's right.
We're not going to be perfect like he was.
No.
But the more we do it as a group, the easier it is us to understand as a group how we should behave.
Yeah. And just so as much as kindness is best demonstrated in our community or families, it is not limited to our community. If it's our group identity, we will act this way at work, school, in our neighborhood, and even with the people we struggle with.
Absolutely, yes. I don't think we can say that enough.
Yeah.
I think too, it's easy to be kind to the people that we like and that are part of our community. And it's the people that we find difficult or we have to be with that we don't necessarily choose to be with.
Yeah.
That really shows that we are followers of Jesus.
That's right.
Well, great. Thanks very much for joining us today as we've been talking about the group identity of kindness. And maybe you could just take a few minutes this week and reflect on a time when maybe you were the recipient of kindness. Who was kind to you, what they did for you, and then maybe just take a moment and feel grateful for that person if it's appropriate to let them know how you feel. Anytime you participate in being grateful, even just with yourself, it does produce joy in us. So we've talked about that before. So I think that's important. And then I think on the flip side of that, who do you have compassion for? And how can you show them kindness this week? So think about someone that you could be kind to this week. And I think I'm having someone pop into my mind. So I think that's a good thing. So thanks again for watching today. Please like and subscribe. Helps us to continue to make this content. And we'll see you next time as we continue to talk about group identity.